In July 2026, a single speech delivered across the border in Tuaneng shattered decades of diplomatic restraint. For generations, millions of African citizens have tilled the soil and extracted diamonds from the earth only to watch their national wealth transferred directly to foreign boardrooms while local communities remain trapped in poverty. When Julius Malema stepped onto the stage to address the Botswana National Front alongside President Duma Boko, he issued an uncompromising ultimatum that rocked the Southern African development community and sent shockwaves through Western diplomatic corridors. This was not merely another political rally. It was an explosive confrontation against the economic structures of neocolonialism. It raises a fundamental dilemma that reaches into the very heart of post-colonial governance. If a nation has the vote, but not the voice, is it truly a democracy? Do not look away. What comes next may change how we read the geopolitical map. If you believe in these stories of self-determination, give us your like, leave your thoughts, and subscribe to continue this journey together. The battle for continental sovereignty has reached its defining moment, demanding that we re-examine who truly holds power across the African continent today. For over a decade, the border between South Africa and Botswana represented a rigid line of political exclusion. Julius Malema, the commander-in-chief of the economic freedom fighters, was declared a prohibited immigrant by previous administrations in Gaborone, effectively suppressing his presence within a neighboring state deeply intertwined with South Africa's own destiny. However, on the 19th of July 2026, that barrier crumbled entirely. Stepping onto the podium in Tuaneng at the National Congress of the Botswana National Front, invited by President Duma Boko himself, Malema marked a triumphant political return that fundamentally shifted the diplomatic landscape of Southern Africa. Where past regimes sought to enforce silence, the newly elected leadership provided a resounding voice, transforming what was once a site of banishment into a vibrant platform for Pan-African solidarity. The atmosphere was charged with historical gravity as thousands gathered to witness a moment that symbolized the end of regional isolation and the beginning of a unified economic front. Addressing an energized crowd, Julius Malema articulated an uncompromising vision for structural transformation that directly challenged the status quo of mineral extraction across the region. At the center of his address was the diamond industry, long dominated by foreign multinational entities like De Beers. Malema asserted that the era of African states accepting passive minority shareholdings in their own natural wealth must come to an immediate end. He insisted that the people of Botswana, through their elected government, must assume direct managerial control over both the diamond sector and agricultural land. It was not enough for citizens to receive token dividends, while corporate headquarters thousands of miles away determined the trajectory of national development. The demand was explicit: multinational corporations must either adhere to the sovereign developmental demands of the local population or yield their operations to those who will. This direct challenge to historical concession agreements struck at the very core of post-colonial economic governance. To understand the immense resonance of this message, one must examine the stark economic realities confronting the region. Across Southern Africa, wealth extraction has historically coexisted with severe domestic deprivation. In South Africa, youth unemployment has escalated beyond 60%, creating deep social friction and widespread disillusionment with orthodox economic policies. Despite billions of United States dollars in annual mineral exports leaving the Southern African development community, municipal infrastructure falters, energy grids collapse, and rural populations remain disenfranchised. By framing the resource debate around direct management rather than superficial reform, Malema connected the struggles of everyday citizens in Botswana with the broader crisis of economic survival in South Africa. The rhetoric was intentionally sharp, reasserting the voice of economic nationalism directly at the seat of power in Gaborone, signaling that regional stability can no longer be decoupled from true wealth redistribution. This dramatic intervention signaled a profound shift in how political power is negotiated across African borders. The era when foreign boardrooms could quietly influence national policies without public scrutiny appears to be drawing to a close. By standing shoulder to shoulder with President Duma Boko Julius Malema, demonstrated that the struggle for economic dignity is no longer confined within national borders, but is rapidly becoming a coordinated regional movement. The message resonated far beyond the rally grounds of Jwaneng disturbing political elites who have long relied on quiet diplomacy and international aid concessions. Yet the economic confrontation over diamonds was only the opening salvo for what Julius Malema uttered next, regarding geopolitical alliances, would send shockwaves directly to Washington and European capitals. As the applause settled over the assembly in Jwaneng, Julius Malema turned his focus from regional resource extraction to the domestic political storm raging inside South Africa. The formation of the Government of National Unity in Pretoria had brought former liberation movements into coalition with historically conservative and white minority interest parties. For Malema, this compromise represented an unacceptable betrayal of the anti-apartheid struggle. He explicitly rejected any political alignment with the Democratic Alliance and the Freedom Front Plus, framing such alliances as a direct insult to the martyrs who died fighting for black liberation. To compromise with parties that historically defended minority privilege, he argued, was to surrender the foundational promise of the freedom struggle. With raw emotional intensity, Malema declared that he would rather remain on the streets of South Africa than to dine with the enemy, adding that he would rather die poor than compromise the revolutionary principles for which generations were exiled and killed. This uncompromising posture extended far beyond domestic parliamentary politics, expanding into a sweeping critique of global power dynamics and Western foreign policy across the global South. Malema challenged African leaders to reject conditional aid and military partnerships from global superpowers, specifically pointing to United States foreign intervention. He cited the decades-long economic embargo imposed on Cuba and the coercive sanctions against Venezuela as glaring examples of imperial overreach designed to subvert sovereign self-determination. For Malema, true Pan-African dignity cannot be bought with foreign assistance or military hardware that carries the weight of external geopolitical agendas. He insisted that African nations must consciously align with states that supported their liberation movements, such as China, Russia, and Cuba, rather than seeking approval from nations that historically underwrote colonial subjugation. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member. Not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for South African Dynamics' mission. Every member becomes a co-creator of the revolution we are documenting. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. Crucially, Malema addressed the internal wounds threatening continental solidarity from within, particularly the destructive surge of xenophobic violence against fellow African migrants in South Africa. He rejected the scapegoating of foreign-born Africans for domestic economic hardship, attributing anti-migrant attacks to a deep-seated pathology of self-hate fostered by centuries of colonial division. Pointing out the shared ancestry, familial ties, and interwoven history between the people of Botswana and South Africa, he insisted that no African can be a foreigner on African soil. He argued that xenophobia merely serves the interests of imperialist forces by keeping the continent fragmented and easily exploited. In his view, true liberation demands an unyielding commitment to continental unity, where shared struggle replaces artificially imposed borders. This passionate rejection of internal division and external domination resonated deeply across the Southern African development community, signaling a rising wave of political defiance. Yet while these fiery declarations redefined political battle lines across southern Africa, an even deeper structural betrayal was unfolding within the legislative heart of the continent itself. The political consequences of this uncompromising ideological stance reverberate directly into the legislative halls of the Pan-African Parliament, headquartered in Midrand, South Africa. For years, this continental body has been deadlocked over the principle of rotational leadership, a mechanism designed to ensure equal representation across regional caucuses. Historically, the Francophone alliance of West and Central Africa, leveraging numerical dominance inherited from colonial administrative boundaries, resisted rotation to maintain administrative control. During recent parliamentary sessions, this institutional dispute escalated into fierce procedural standoffs. Critics point to the subtle yet persistent influence of external powers, particularly France, whose diplomatic figures have previously addressed the chamber prior to key leadership votes. In challenging this dominance, the Julius Malema speech at regional forums highlighted how structural manipulation within continental institutions mirrors the broader disenfranchisement of African citizens, demanding that governance reflect the genuine will of the entire continent rather than foreign diplomatic agendas. Beyond parliamentary corridors, the civil consequences of unaddressed structural inequality continue to destabilize everyday life across South Africa. Decades after the formal end of apartheid, economic power remains concentrated in fewer hands, leaving vast townships without basic services or sustainable employment opportunities. The promises of post-1994 reconciliation are increasingly viewed by disillusioned youth not as a bridge to prosperity, but as a compromise that froze historical injustice in place. When political elites celebrate macroeconomic growth indicators, while rural communities lack clean water and arable land, the legitimacy of the social contract erodes. This systemic failure demands a fundamental departure from conventional political discourse, not reform, not rhetoric, accountability. It forces every citizen to confront a bitter reality that defines contemporary governance if power changes hands. But not structure has anything really changed. Take a second right here to tell us where you are watching from. Type the name of your city, your land, the soil beneath your feet. And as you do know, this South African dynamic sends you not just thanks, but a blessing for strength in your hands, for pride in your heart, for light on the road ahead. The comments below become a map of connection, showing that this message reaches far beyond borders. This growing popular awakening is reshaping political expectations across the Southern African development community. Citizens are no longer satisfied with symbolic gestures or elite power-sharing arrangements that leave systemic poverty untouched. From the mining towns of the Rustenburg Belt to the agricultural valleys of Limpopo, working communities are asserting their right to economic dignity and land ownership. The insistence on sovereign resource management is transforming local struggles into a collective demand for historical restitution. As domestic dissatisfaction merges with regional calls for self-determination, traditional ruling elites find themselves increasingly isolated from the very populations they claim to represent. Yet, as the struggle for internal democratic renewal gained momentum within Southern Africa, international powers began to observe these developments with mounting concern, preparing their own diplomatic and economic counter-strategies. The geopolitical shockwaves generated by this bold Pan-African posturing extended swiftly to Western diplomatic missions in Washington, London, and Paris. For decades, foreign policy analysts in European and North American capitals viewed Southern Africa primarily through the prism of resource security and geopolitical stability. When figures like Julius Malema openly advocate for the nationalization of mineral wealth and the expulsion of foreign military interests, Western media institutions frequently frame such demands as populist threats to international market equilibrium. However, this conventional framing ignores a profound structural shift currently underway across the global South. As global economic powers compete for critical minerals necessary for energy transitions, African states are increasingly refusing to be treated as passive suppliers of raw materials, demanding instead equitable processing, domestic manufacturing, and sovereign control over their natural endowments. This continental awakening draws undeniable inspiration from recent precedents established in West Africa, particularly across the Sahel region. The decisive actions taken by military and political leadership in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger to terminate foreign defense agreements, expel Western military contingents, and reassert national ownership over gold and uranium reserves served as a dramatic blueprint for anti-colonial resistance. These events shattered the long-standing illusion that external intervention guarantees security or economic stability. Instead, they demonstrated that real independence requires dismantling the structural mechanisms of neocolonial influence, presenting the continent with a stark ideological choice between the chains of external dependence and the genuine freedom of self-directed development. By breaking this historic chain of economic servitude, West African nations demonstrated that sovereign statehood can be reclaimed when popular will aligns with decisive governance. Consequently, international organizations and global financial institutions are coming to realize that the geopolitical status quo established in 1960 is rapidly dissolving. The rising demand for Pan-African sovereignty reflects a mature, multipolar world order where African nations actively leverage their diplomatic partnerships with BRICS members and emerging global economies to bypass historic dependencies. Rather than accepting conditional loans or dictated security frameworks, a new generation of citizens and leaders insists on absolute equality on the international stage. With the geopolitics of Africa reaching an unprecedented crossroad, one final decisive question remains for the continent's rising generation. The path forward for Southern Africa and the wider continent lies along a perilous yet transformative threshold. The emerging political consensus forged between progressive movements in South Africa and Botswana establishes a formidable framework for economic liberation, but it also invites intense opposition from established global interest groups. As African nations attempt to renegotiate resource contracts and reclaim territorial wealth, the risk of economic retaliation, whether through capital flight credit rating downgrades or covert diplomatic destabilization, remains acutely real. Navigating these external pressures requires more than popular enthusiasm. It demands disciplined statecraft, robust regional institutions, and an unyielding commitment to continental solidarity. The lessons of post-colonial history demonstrate that political independence without structural economic control is an empty promise. When foreign powers attempt to dictate how sovereign nations manage their mineral endowment through coercive economic measures, it exposes the oppressive mechanics of modern global power, not law, not justice, enforcement. Yet, despite these formidable challenges, the trajectory toward self-reliance appears increasingly unstoppable. A younger, more politically conscious generation across the African diaspora is rejecting the narrative of historical helplessness, viewing continental resources not as commodities to be plundered, but as the foundation of future prosperity and global dignity. By building cross-border alliances that transcend colonial linguistic barriers, bridging Anglophone, Francophone, and Lusophone territories, the Pan-African movement is constructing an enduring defense against external division. The courage displayed by leaders willing to confront systemic exploitation, even at immense personal and political cost, inspires millions to demand accountable governance from their own institutions. True sovereignty will not be granted by benevolent international decree. It must be claimed through relentless organization, shared sacrifice, and an unwavering belief in a collective destiny. As we prepare to end, remember, this is not the end of the road, but a seed planted in the soil of your heart. Every story of dignity, every voice of sovereignty is part of a harvest that lies ahead. If you want to see that harvest grow, subscribe. Let this channel be the road we walk together, the light we carry forward. Your subscription is not for us alone, it is for the promise of what is still to come. Join us and be ready for the next chapter that is already waiting to be written. And so as the dust settles over the rally grounds of Jwaneng, the echo of this turning point carries directly into the judgment of history. What we have witnessed unfolding across the halls of Jwaneng and the parliament in Midrand is not a passing chapter of political theatre, but a historic realignment of continental power. The reverberations of the Julius Malema speech extend far beyond the immediate domestic politics of South Africa, signaling to the entire world that the era of economic compromise is coming to an end. For decades, the wealth of Southern Africa was treated as an open quarry for foreign interests, while the citizens who labored under the sun were offered empty promises of gradual reform. Today, that narrative has been irrevocably shattered. By demanding direct managerial control over national mineral wealth and asserting an unyielding defense of national dignity, this movement has reframed the global conversation around resource ownership and self-determination. The pursuit of genuine Pan-African sovereignty is no longer a distant theoretical ambition. It has become the defining moral duty of our time. As neighboring states witness the courage required to stand against structural exploitation, the mandate for economic self-reliance grows stronger with every passing day. History will record that this Julius Malema speech served as a rallying cry for millions who refused to see their heritage diminished by foreign design. The fundamental question now rests with every African citizen and every observer across the global diaspora. When the history of this continent's economic liberation is finally written, will we be remembered as passive onlookers to our own exploitation, or as the generation that stood firm, reclaimed its birthright, and built a future defined by dignity, justice, and absolute self-determination?